think we should kick it off. I think, people will kind of dial in and out as they please, but thank you to everyone for joining, especially our panelists. Chris, Fraley, we've been trying to do this panel for a couple of years. It's pretty amazing that this Pride panel even exists in the first place. It probably would not have existed probably, even a decade ago. Anyhow, kind of few housekeeping items before we dive in. I just wanted to let everyone know that we will be recording this panel. There's a couple folks who couldn't make it, and so we'll be recording it for their sake. The format of this panel is pretty interactive. It's a pretty intimate group. So, the first 30 minutes or so, we'll have the panelists speak with some prepared topics. And then the last half hour or so, we'll open it up to Q&A. And then kind of along the way, feel free to ping me questions. Some people have already emailed us questions, which we'll ask, and then we'll try to get to most of them. And then just as background on LGREG, LGREG is an LGBTQ real estate networking group. We have chapters in a variety of cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, and New York. If you have questions about LA, talk to Chris Fraley. I run our San Francisco chapter. Brian Furze, who's on the panel, is in Boston. And then Guy and Jack, who are both, on video here as well. There you go. They're based out of New York if you want to join their group. Anyhow, feel free to message us if you have any questions about our membership. And then I think we should just kick it off with kind of brief panelist intros. I'll be kind of moderating the panel and asking folks a bunch of questions. And as background, sorry, my name is Rio Ishida and I work at Rainbow Capital Partners. We invest primarily in underfunded operators in real estate. And underfunded for us primarily include people of color, LGBTQ+, and females. We'll talk a little bit more, but it's sort of shocking the low percentage of folks that are funded who are minority developers or owner operators. And then about 90% of our investors are diverse, which is a stat we're pretty proud of. And then before Rainbow, I worked for a bunch of private equity firms. I worked for Prudential Real Estate Investors and Linneman Associates. I've also worked on the operator side as well, working for a few developers, and most recently worked for a prop tech firm called Lyric, which is an apartment style hotel backed by Airbnb. So yeah, that's my quick intro. Chris Fraley, I thought we would kick it off with you. If you could just quickly introduce yourself and then we'll kind of pass the mic.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Chris Fraley. Started my real estate career at Rockwood Capital. I was there for 14 years, kind of post MBA. Became partner in 2006, left in 2013, started my own business, which really ended up being an outsourced CIO entity, and later joined Realty Mogul as chief investment officer, and also involved in a handful of additional developments, including a few with Forge Development Partners.
Great. And Lindsay, maybe we'll start off with West Coast folks and then end it with Brian. But Lindsay, if you could go next, that would be awesome.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Sugar. I'm presently Senior Managing Director at Elion Partners. I joined the day of the coup attempt this year, so that was memorable. And basically, I head up our institutional capital raising activities. Elion's a minority-owned emerging manager. We have about $2 billion under management. And so I joined in order to raise institutional capital. And prior to that, I worked with Japanese capital, setting up strategic partnerships. I've worked on behalf of large public pension funds as an investment consultant for groups like CalPERS and Neisters. I've done my own consulting work with a lot of emerging managers, including Realty Mogul and including Artemis Real Estate Partners. And before that, I did acquisitions and asset management and was a placement agent. So the joke is that I've held every role in real estate at this point.
Awesome. And then Lindsay, you're based in Los Angeles still, right?
I'm in Los Angeles right now, yeah.
Awesome. And then over to Christopher Rice Shepherd.
Wow, I was just thinking, I've done everything that Lindsay's done, but I've not been a placement agent, so she wins. Darn it. Okay. Well, no points for second place. My name is Chris Rice Shepherd. I too am based in Los Angeles, but I currently work for Crow Holdings, Dallas-based fund manager and development company. I've been on the fundraising side only for a few years, actually, at Crow, and then prior to Crow at Wafra with Kuwaiti management. But prior to that, I spent a good chunk of my career also as an investment consultant. I ran the real estate advisory practice at Cliffwater, and then before that, sort of various acquisition and asset management roles for other, PE shops. So, me in a nutshell.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Brian.
Hi, everybody. Brian Furs. I am the Senior Vice President of Leasing at WS Development. For all of you on the West Coast, we just purchased our first California asset this past week, Montgomery Village up in Santa Rosa. So we are officially coast to coast now. We had made it as far as Wichita before that. And so we're excited to be joining the California ranks. I have had a career of asset management primarily prior to being at WS. I was at a private friends and family company, then worked at an institutionally backed company that managed a retirement pension fund in New England, and then went on to Federal Realty, where I ran Boston, New York, and Chicago for the company for a while before coming to WS to take over leasing in their core portfolio, which is our grocery anchored and power anchored shopping center division. We have about 70 properties all over the Northeast. That is my background.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, with that, I think we should kind of, talk about the big elephant in the room, which is the whole kind of panel discussion is really centered around, really being your authentic self at work, and what does that actually mean, and how has it evolved over the years? And I feel like this topic is, particularly timely as I think a lot of folks here saw on the news that Carl Nassib, who's a professional football player in the NFL, came out as gay yesterday. And Chris Fraley, we've talked about this before, but how, real estate and professional sports are, I think you said, the last kind of bastions of homophobia in America, right? That was a couple of years ago. So Chris, kind of starting with you, how has the business evolved, over the course of your career, just being, gay and out? If you could kick it off, that would be super helpful.
Yeah. It's funny. I was reflecting back to 1998 when I was invited to Greg, the New York gay real estate group. Guy, I don't know if you were actually at that meeting, but there were about 20 people in the room. It was very, very formal. It was in the university club, and they had what was called MBA night, where they invited MBA students to come in and kind of like a mentorship event. And so it ended up just being me and one other person. And they said, "Oh, well, do you have any questions for us?" And I said, "Well, what's it like to be gay at your company?" And they were all completely shocked. They didn't know what to say. And they said, "Wow, no one's ever asked us that before. We've actually never talked about being gay at the gay real estate group." And I think a lot of the people were closeted, and not out. And, and fast forward to today, I think it's great that we obviously still there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's been a pretty broad increase of acceptance and visibility over the last 25 years.
Pretty crazy. And Chris, sort of, we'll dive into this topic more, but like, when you were first kind of in the industry, did you come out at work like purposefully, or it happened naturally? You said, "Oh, my boyfriend is, picking me up," or whatever it is. But, how did that kind of process evolve?
Yeah. Yeah, the first time I came out at work, it was, I was kind of a late bloomer. You know, I first realized I was gay in my mid-20s, and I had my first serious boyfriend when I was 29, and I had just started working at Rockwood Capital. And my boyfriend, I was flying from DC, and and with my boss, and Chris and Lindsay know him, Walter Schmidt, and and my boyfriend was picking me up, and he said, "Oh, Chris, do you need a ride anywhere?" This is my boss at the time. "Chris, you need a ride anywhere?" I said, "Oh, no, that's okay. My boyfriend's picking me up." And he was like, "Oh," and I've always found that, if you don't make an issue out of it, no one else does. If you have to make a big drama and presentation about coming out, then, it's so much nicer, I think, when, you can just kind of casually mention it rather than making a big production out of it. But I do think it is, important to be authentic.
Yeah, Brian, in Boston, what's been your experience, sort of being LGBTQ plus in real estate, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I'd say it's been very evolutionary. I started in the business in 1999 at a downtown commercial brokerage house for office space, a pretty inhospitable space for a young gay guy. And so I largely remained closeted. My boyfriend's name at the time was actually Jamie, so that totally worked for pronoun-free conversations. And I rode that for quite a few years. I think even after we broke up, I might have used that for a little while. And then I joined a private small company, and it got a lot harder to go to small Christmas parties and be interacting with people that I knew a lot better without being a bit more honest. And so I rolled out there after about a year that I was gay and that I was in a relationship. And the reactions were pretty interesting. I think one of the two partners in my company didn't say much and seemed fine with it. The other made a point of telling me how many gay friends he had and that he thought my life was going to be more difficult because I had chosen to come out in commercial real estate. And candidly, for the first 3 or 4 years, he probably was right. But I think over the last decade, the business and the space, at least in New England, has become a lot more progressive, especially in the retail world where I am. Many of the retail buyers and some of the retail clients are gay, retail proprietors are gay, so that has made it a bit easier. But, in the last 4 or 5 years is really where I sort of jumped into the pool completely. I was in a lavender ceiling article with Chris Fraley a couple of years ago, and that was sort of a big outing. And it's really been great since. I think it made my ability to communicate with my peers in the business much easier. People really appreciated me being my authentic self and being able to hear about my family and hear about my child and just have a really honest relationship. So it's been a wonderful experience, especially over the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, Brian, I remember seeing your name first actually in that Breaking the Lavender Ceiling article. I think Biz Now did that a couple of years ago and just was super inspired by that, just profiling different folks in senior positions in various roles in real estate. And then Christopher Rice Shepherd, curious, what's been your experience sort of being gay in commercial real estate, as well as, being a person of color? How do you kind of manage those different identities?
Ooh, wow. That's a whole other layer. So maybe I'll just kind of keep it to the topic at hand. I'm sorry, the person of color being another layer.
Okay.
Just to talk about how far we've come, I like to think of my first gay at work experience, which was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. In 1998, I was living in San Francisco and I was working for Payne Weber in the real estate investment banking group. Recently out, I'd been dating a guy. I mean, look, we'd been on 2 dates. I knew he was a waiter. That's about all that I knew. Didn't know where. I'm at lunch with my VP, my director and partner, and guess who our waiter is at the restaurant we had gone to for lunch? I don't think I've ever since been more terrified than at that moment. And I'm pretty sure I walked out and faked an illness, just didn't know how to handle it. Not that, look, I have no idea how they would have handled it, but I just, I was 22 years old and not willing to go there. Compare that, fast forward, 10 or 15 years and, having my husband at, work functions and Christmas parties, has not really been a big deal. I will say, so I've been out, I kind of, for me, it was sort of twofold. One, when I had children, I changed my last name and then I hyphenated my last name. And then, the full out sort of always came with sort of a job change, right? You just sort of, you walk into it and you just sort of go in, 100%, and you kind of look for opportunities to sort of just plot it in there so that you don't have that fear anymore. So I don't think it's been, look, you don't wear your sexuality on your face, most of us. And so that's been probably a little bit easier to handle than the color aspect, because most people know I am Black. People like to talk about that one first when it comes to being a minority in real estate. Not a lot of people of color in our industry either. So it's been an interesting mix. What's funny is I think sometimes we all take it for granted where we are. And I think most of us on this call are in Los Angeles, San Francisco, or Boston or New York. I work for Crow Holdings, which is based in Dallas. And, stereotype, or not, there are, it's a growing, bustling city of commerce, but, there are some truths that remain about the South, and especially about Dallas. Recently, and I would say this was early fall, I banded together with a few colleagues to try to establish some affinity groups at Crow Holdings, people of color and LGBTQ. And first of all, it was tough because there weren't really enough of us to make a significant, group for conversation or meeting or otherwise. Of 200 employees at Crow Holdings, 188 are white. And so there's not a big representation there. As far as LGBTQ, we didn't know who else was LGBTQ because, I was sort of loud and out and proud, but, I fly in from LA once a month and, with my funky colored glasses and people knew who I was, but there were not other out employees at Crow. So we had to send out some emails and we kind of found some. To make a long story short, the company was very uncomfortable with having those affinity groups and decided they wouldn't support them. They wouldn't allow us to announce events on the internet. There had been some articles that, we had wanted to send out about diversity in real estate. That was a big no. And the answer was, these things should happen organically. And the fact of the matter is these things don't always happen organically. They do for some people and not for others. And so, the whole argument that comfort, creates comfort, and helps retention, and there's a sort of a bottom line impact here, didn't resonate. I think there's a lot of fear in certain parts of the country. And we were told that that these topics were particularly sensitive because of the election that was upcoming. And so it was sort of swept under the rug. And so I was kind of blown away, actually, very disappointed and blown away that there wasn't more support there. I mean, at the end of the day, it was 10 of us who decided that, working for a company in Dallas where basically everyone went to the same high school in Highland Park, needed some more outreach for, internally for retention, but also for recruitment. And it was not supported at all. So we've come a long way. I don't think people are screaming when their boyfriends are popping into restaurants, but at the same time, it still makes people uncomfortable. So,
yeah. Yeah, and Chris, for you, like, did you have sort of role models being a Black gay man in real estate? Did you have kind of role models to look up to, or like, who are your biggest mentors kind of helping you in the space?
Oh my gosh. Chris Fraley, truthfully.
Yeah.
I met Chris, was it? It's, oh, wow, close to 20 years ago. And for those of you who know Chris, he is calm, he is collected, he's cerebral, and and that's a role model to me because he is who he is, and he's engaging for so many other reasons than the fact that he's gay. But Chris married before I did, and Chris had kids before I did, I think. And so, yeah, there we go, Chris Fraley.
Yeah. Seriously.
What am I? Yeah,
Oh, go
definitely.
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. As far as, wow, we should do a different panel that's called Black, Gay, and in Real Estate. And I think there might be like 2 people on it or 3, and I don't even know who they'd be because I'm not sure I know anyone else. I'm sure they're out there, but yeah.
I mean,
You kind
Chris,
of pick your balance.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Honestly, visibility is everything, right? So even 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, this panel would have looked totally different. Just seeing the various kind of faces and diversity, even within the LGBTQ community, is amazing. And seriously, shout out to Chris Fraley, for as a young person coming out and kind of figuring out, I would often model my behavior after kind of Chris Fraley and say, okay, how is he doing this? How does he be authentic yet professional at the same time? And Chris, and as well as all the kind of the panelists and the folks in this group, I think have been role models for lots of folks, especially the younger ones. And Lindsay, last but not least, tell us a little bit about your experience kind of starting off in your career. How was your sort of coming out process professionally?
Sure. So, like I said, I've worked in a lot of different roles and for a lot of different types of companies. I've worked for small companies and very large companies. And some of it has been fantastic. I worked for someone who's well known in the industry, Christy Fields, who headed up the consulting practice at PCA, and Alan Emkin, who was the head. And they couldn't have been happier to have a gay person on their team because it was increased diversity for them and everything that they believed in, right? So with Christy, it was like I came out during the interview process because I wanted to make sure that there would be no potential issues, right? If I was going to join that team. With other groups, I've also come out during the interview process, and it's been a little bit trickier. It still factors in, I was married, I had children. We had 2 children together. We're not married any longer, but there was like a lot of dicey issues sort of surrounding being married to a woman. And when I got pregnant and people telling me, oh, wow, we thought we were safe with you, we didn't think you'd have kids, stuff like that. That was just eye-opening, right? Like people are just really that dumb in a way, like that lack of thoughtful about how the world works these days. There's no other way to say it. And so I've seen sort of everything under the sun. And so when I was looking for the next role, which is what I'm doing now, I really wanted to be in a place that felt very diverse. And so we're 100% minority owned. Everyone's an immigrant who's an owner of the company. Our numbers are probably the best in institutional real estate. And that's something that I really sought out in terms of like our diversity. We have, I think, 67% diversity on the senior management team. And it's something that we actively recruit for and are very thoughtful about. And that's the type of world in which I want to live now, because I've lived in a lot of different other worlds, and that's not what I want to do anymore. And so for me, I'm very lucky to now be able to be, have a role in a company that actually really values this, where we're going to try to be, an example of what a diverse firm can look like and can grow into being. And so I feel like that is now on me and on other members of the firm to make that a reality.
Yeah, and Lindsay, like fast forward to today, like when was the last time you had to kind of come out at work? Is it in an investor relations meeting? Is it Is it pretty seamless, or are you strategic about it? You try to out yourself before there's an awkward comment. Like, how does that process work for you?
Sure. So I think with me, I forget that people don't know I'm gay because I've been very out and vocal about it for, to me, what seems like quite a long time. But a lot of people apparently still don't know I'm gay, so they'll ask me about my ex-husband frequently, and then I say it's my ex-wife, and they go, "Oh."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, I didn't," and so it's a constant process. Because I'm in capital raising and I meet with so many people, just like Ray Shepherd does, you're just meeting new people all the time. So you're constantly coming out. I mean, it's not what I lead with, but I'm also never gonna, hide it. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting dance.
Yeah. So Lindsay, when someone makes like an awkward comment, like, "Oh, how did it go with your ex-husband?" Do you have like kind of set remarks that you say to kind of get out of an awkward situation? Not really for you, maybe, but really for them, right? They might be kind of blushing red, and how do you kind of make them feel
Yeah,
comfortable?
I mean, I just make it a total non-issue. I'm just like, "Oh, actually, my ex-wife, XYZ," right?
Yeah.
Like I don't talk about it, and then I just move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris and Brian, in the development space, right? It's a little bit more, how should I say, less diverse. So like, when was the last time you had to come out at work? Again, do you kind of strategically preempt that question, or you just address it as it comes?
I never strategically preempt it. I go out of my way to make sure that this isn't about my sexuality. This is about my professional life and me being a human being. And so when it comes up, it usually comes up in much the same way that Lindsay raised, where somebody makes a comment about my wife, and I have to gently correct them. And candidly, it depends on my mood as to whether I correct them in that moment or correct them later offline. And I never want the conversation, if we're talking about business, to suddenly shift to my family dynamic. So it is a bit of a constant dance to figure out exactly the right moment. And it is, of course, uncomfortable every single time, which is frustrating. But it is what it is. I just came out on LinkedIn because there was a big story about my family in USA Today, because we had been discriminated against in our home by one of our neighbors for a long time. And they caught the neighbor and arrested him, and it became a big national story. So I actually took that as an opportunity to send a message out to LinkedIn about bullying, because I actually thought it would resonate with our industry and remind people that you'd really never know who you're in the room with. And I will say that the reception has been tremendous, and I hope I think it will make it easier for me going forward to feel comfortable setting the record straight, as I like to call it. But I hope it makes it easier for others as well.
Yeah, Brian, I saw that. And I'm sorry about that sort of that whole story, but it's pretty crazy too. Sort of your next door neighbor, right? Who was harassing you and who you thought was friendly and more progressive.
Yeah, our very friendly next door neighbor has been harassing us through the United States Postal Service for 5 years, but we finally got him, which was great.
Yeah. Next question. Sorry, a couple of questions are kind of trickling in as people message me, but question for all the parents out there on the panelists and beyond. But both Chris's, I think both and Lindsay are parents. And Brian, actually, everybody's a parent here. Sort of, can you talk about managing being a LGBTQ parent? How does that offer kind of different dynamics? And do you talk about your kids at work? I'm sure you do, but kind of a little background on kind of folks who are LGBTQ and have families at work would be super helpful. So Chris, Fairley, why don't we kick it off with you?
Sure. I mean, I guess it gives another opportunity to come out at work too, right? I mean, I think that you asked the question, how do you come out at work? I feel like I come out every day in one way or another. And I think, I think when you start talking about your kids, naturally, or very often, people, assume that there's, a wife involved or an ex-wife or something, and that usually triggers some additional conversation, and yet another opportunity to be authentic.
Yeah, and Chris, Brian, and Lindsay, is it any different than being a heterosexual couple with kids, or what's kind of the nuances with it?
Nothing outs you faster than discussion of children.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wearing like a rainbow hat and and Speedos, and people might suspect, but when you start asking about kids, like you get questions that are like, that force you out, like, oh, did you save the placenta? And you're like, oh, it's like, my kids are adopted and they don't look like me. And so the questions are just, are hilarious sometimes. That being said, there's also no better way to sort of bridge a gap with someone at work or just socially than by having kids, because the same person who may have thought, wow, you're different, you're gay, that's probably the same person that in their mind's going to go, wait, you have kids? You think like I do? Like, you're not a child molester? I mean, it really becomes a topic that allows a lot of, it elicits compassion, but it also, it just provides a connection. And so I find that the people who are most uncomfortable in my workplace about my being gay love to talk about my kids. It's like how they relate to me. So, yeah.
I think another thing that kids do, though, that's really fascinating to me is kids, they accentuate the traditional family values in people you wouldn't expect. So I'm sure Lindsay's seen it. She actually talked about it a little bit with the idea of, well, we thought we were safe with you because we didn't think you were going to get pregnant because you were gay. But you see the same thing in many, many different ways where people will say, well, what do you mean you have to take your kid to the doctor? Because they're implying, well, why wouldn't your wife do that? I've seen the same thing from some of my lesbian friends where they're working and people are saying, well, what are you doing with your kids? How are you doing this? How are you managing this? So in some people that you really wouldn't expect it from, who don't have any ill intention at all, the gay family will definitely bring out the traditional family values and make people evaluate what they're thinking about.
I'll also say it works in the other direction. And I don't know if you, Lindsay, or Chris have experienced this. There's a large portion of the gay community that, assumes that you're trying to fit some heteronormative, paradigm when getting married and having kids. And it's not always well received. There's sort of a gap there. And so I find increasingly as I'm older, for some obvious reasons, a lot of my gay friends have kids. And that's, not by accident. I think we have a lot of things in common, but, some of my other gay friends, they look at me like I have the plague about, when it comes to some of the choices I've made. And so that's hard. And that's provided, some sleepless nights for me, to be honest.
Yeah, and Chris, interviewing for when you interviewed for Crow for a couple of years ago, did you come out during the interview process? Were you nervous that they're a pretty conservative shop based out of Texas, or kind of were those stereotypes thrown to the wayside once you joined?
So that's a unique case. When I was a consultant at Cliffwater, I had gotten to know the Crow team pretty well, and as we had clients invested in their funds. So they already knew, just because I had, developed a lot of friendships there, personal relationships. And so that wasn't a surprise. But, working for them is a different story, right? I mean, you can have professional liaisons that aren't sort of personal ones. And when you go in-house, some of those things come to the forefront. So I think during the interview process, I did bring it up, what's this environment likely to be for me? And there's a generation gap in terms of, I find, that treatment and that comfort. It's sort of kind of the above 50 and the, below 40, just really different reactions and comfort levels. But, going forward, like Lindsay, I would always bring it up in the interview process if I could. Look, it's just too important. Your personal life and your professional life just overlap in so many ways. You never want to leave yourself exposed professionally because you've held something back, and you don't know how people will react. I mean, I think for the most part, look, discrimination certainly happens, but I think in most of our circles, it's understood that we're out there, and so I'm not sure that that anyone's likely to encounter any visceral reactions in that process. But I would always want it on the table, first and foremost. I remember a coming out at work that was pretty interesting. I was in Los Angeles and I worked for Stockbridge, San Francisco based. This was around 2005 or so. And I don't think I had brought it up in the interview process at that point, but I brought it up because I wanted to ask about health insurance for my husband. And so that was a segue. And it was interesting. They hadn't thought about it. They didn't have a policy on it, but got back to me in 24 hours and said, because my marriage wasn't legal. It wasn't 2007. We were married, but we weren't legally married. And they said, hey, you had a wedding, good enough for us, and extended those health benefits. So that was a sort of a nice, sort of comfortable way to come out and told me a lot about my firm that at the time didn't have to do it, but they chose to do it.
Lindsay,
I've had that experience quite a bit as well, Rio, where something that comes up because of our family dynamics makes a company look at their internal policies. And the good news is my company's, whichever it's been at the time, has always been a very reaffirming and positive response. And it's been something that every HR department that's been encountered with it says, we're sort of embarrassed that we didn't think about this, and has apologized, but they've always responded really kindly and appropriately.
well, I think this panel poll, right, is just a testament of kind of the changing tides where, again, probably 10 years ago when I would look up for role models to see, who are, LGBTQ plus folks who have kids. And it's pretty amazing that, all of you have kids and have been kind of role models to everybody else. Lindsay, lots of questions sort of switching gears from folks on kind of managing your various identities, especially as a female LGBTQ person. Where is, every person's experience is different, but kind of where do you see the most, sexism, racism, whatever ism? Is it you being gay? Is it you being a female? Can you talk a little bit about kind of managing those two identities?
Sure. So my first, sort of jobs, my first entree points really to institutional real estate was after I got my master's. Before that, I didn't really think it was so much of an issue. And then I was surrounded only by older white men. And so it was just a weird feeling that you could be representing, either as an investment manager, so you're investing on behalf of public institutions, or as a consultant, so you're advising on behalf of large public institutions, and the people around you are all one type of person, right? And no diversity, sexually either. And so it was interesting when I was an investment consultant, I worked for another woman, and then I actually had two female bosses. I worked a little bit on infrastructure and a little bit on real estate, and mostly in real estate. But if the three of us were all together, we were always the only women in the room. So it would be the three of us walk in, and there's like, say, a huge conference room of 13 men. And it was so interesting. It's begun to look different now, for sure. But not for every company. I mean, what Chris says about Crow, I've consulted for Crow. I've done work with Crow too. It's absolutely true. That place looks no different probably than it did 15 years ago. There are many other investment managers that look entirely the same. They're typically in places like Texas and the Sun Belt. And everything that we say about, we have this coastal privilege, whichever coast you're on, or if you're in Chicago, probably, it is a very different mindset. And so for me, And I had some really great mentors, throughout my career, and females and minorities actually. And so I was very lucky that I never had to really worry about, not being backed up by someone, right? Not being like, oh, well, Lindsay's going to handle this. Lindsay's going to do this, and like champion me. And that's why it's so important, for me to do that now for other people. But I think actually like being a woman, 15 years ago, in sort of just beginning to be in a decision-making role as I, rose through the ranks, like freaked enough people out. There were very, very few of us. There are still very, very few of us in many different roles. I think it is changing now. More women are graduating MBA programs than men are. More women are, getting into masters in real estate programs than men are. It's interesting to see how it evolves. But I definitely think for me, that's been the biggest piece.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even within this kind of diverse group of folks, right? I just think if you're a female, if you're a person of color, sort of being a double minority, it's that much harder. I mean, just look at our group composition. Chris Fairley and I and a bunch of us have tried to improve the diversity within the group, but it's still, I think it's just that much harder if you're a double minority.
It's interesting, Rio.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I have the statistic right. Believe it or not, about a third of the California LGREG list are women. I mean, I was shocked when I kind of went down, because usually the representation at meetings is quite low, and I think it's really important for, this is both New York, Boston, San Francisco, LA. It's really important for the men in the group to really go out of their way to make women feel welcome at the professional networking groups, and encourage people to come, because having that diversity in the group is really important. I actually felt this. I was asked. I'm very involved in Start Out, and Lesbians Who Tech is one of our LA board members was also on the board of Lesbians Who Tech, and she asked me to come, and I was really nervous. Am I going to feel welcome? And I show up at the event, and sure enough, I'm the only man in the room, and I get it. Like it's a little overwhelming, and luckily there was one woman there that kind of took me under her wing, and I had an amazing time, and we chit-chatted the whole time. But really go out of your way to make extend the welcome. And because I have seen, if you're at a LGREG or Greg event and you see a woman kind of standing by herself, like go up and say hello and make her feel welcome.
Hey, Rio and Chris, but also for the young people on the call, we all, I think, have spent a bunch of time in our careers already trying to recruit into, whether it's BGREG or an LGREG, or whether it's our own companies. We've been trying to find ways to increase diversity. It's very hard to increase diversity in a non-diverse business, because the people aren't there. You can't just throw someone in your C-suite if they have no real estate experience. So to the young people that are on here, and to your friends, keep at it, please, because the best way for us to increase representation is to grow you within our business and grow you within our ranks, because then you're ready to be the next leaders. It's much too hard to try to bring somebody in from an outside angle. So kudos to you for being here. Encourage your peers to do the same thing, and the screen will start to change. There'll be more color and more gender diversity here.
Yeah, and we're hiring. Elian's hiring. I'm hiring on my team. We're hiring across the firm. Really, we have offices that we're hiring in Miami and New York. And when people also have challenge, when people say it's really hard to to hire diverse candidates or whatever, if anyone ever needs or cares to hire diverse candidates, I'll give you the exact path as to how you do it, because this is what we're doing. This is very important to us. And so I can tell you who to reach out to, where you can post the jobs, et cetera. I'd be happy to always assist with that.
Yeah, Lindsay, I might follow up with you on that, because one of the questions I don't think we may get to is kind of how do you actually increase, diversity, not just for LGBTQ, but for people of color, for females, within within commercial real estate, right? To Brian's point, if you don't have the pipeline of diverse candidates, you're not going to see diversity at the top, in the next 5+ years. But yeah, Lindsay, do you have any kind of strategic kind of initiatives or best practices you've done to increase diversity within a firm?
Sure. I mean, so we're constantly thinking about how to hire, and then how to retain, right? And luckily the firm has done a good job of that way before I joined. So we have a specific DEI policy. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a steering committee for that. That's made out of both of people within our company as well as 2 external advisors. And then we track, right, who we're hiring and promotion based on, gender and ethnicity, to make sure that we're not having any issues within, compensation or anything like that. We report demographic staff data to our LPs. A lot of the groups that we're working with right now that are institutional capital sources actually do care about this. So if you're a group in California, New York, to some degree in Texas, to some degree in Illinois, some states actually have mandates where they're looking to hire diverse managers. It's important to them. Or they're looking to hire emerging managers. It's important to them. And so we've been able to work with some groups in order to be their investment in their investment managers. It's a way to get in as an emerging manager with very large investors like a CalSTRS. We just brought in capital from CalSTRS, which is really exciting. So that's kind of how we look about figuring out what ideally our composition would be. We'd like to remain really high percentage wise in terms of diversity, because we think it just makes us better. It guards against groupthink, and we believe that the company itself, I mean, everyone who came, and there's 4 partners, they're all immigrants, and it's just sort of in the ethos of the company. So lucky to get to be a part of that, and also at the same time take it very seriously to be able to continue to, as we grow and build out our teams, to be able to have that sort of diversity. I think it'll ultimately make us stronger.
And Christopher Rice Shepherd, a couple questions kind of for you on the theme of being a double minority. What's it like been for you? Is it harder to be a gay man in real estate? Is it harder to be a Black man in real estate? If you had to choose sides, so to speak.
I'm definitely going to say Black, because for me, that has been, there've been some hurdles there, sort of broadly within the industry. I cannot tell you how many times per year, probably 3 to 4 times a year, I'm in a meeting and someone will ask where I went to school, and I'll say I went to Stanford, and the response is always, "Oh, did you play sports there? Did you get a sports scholarship?" And I'm all the time. So it's hilarious. I now laugh it off. I'm 5'10", I'm out of shape. I don't play sports, never have. But it comes up. And similarly, and I'm gonna kind of hold this group to task as well. This is my own personal experience, and I don't want to call anyone out. I'm 44 years old, and I've been around the block a bit. And I find that groups of gay white men are also not particularly warm and inviting. And I will speak to, some LGREG events that I've been to in Los Angeles. The events that are, sort of academic and, held in law offices are wonderful. Exchanges of information are great. And the social events, by the way, I am not shy. I will walk into a a store and make conversation with anyone. And I've had more trouble breaking in socially in groups of gay white men than any other group ever. And so when we talk about increasing diversity amongst our own ranks, I just think everyone should think about sort of the role that they play in creating that safe space for people of color or for women. We all have a role to play. And just because we all carry the gay card does not mean that we are all friends and supportive. And my experience has been that we are not at all. So, and then just, back to your question, Rio, having, representation is key. But, one question I often get with my kids is, oh, are there a lot of other gay families at their school? And what I found is, look, that representation is important, but you just want to surround yourself with the right type of people. And so my kids happen to go to a school that's, very liberal and open. And I'm pretty sure that when those kids go home and speak to their straight parents and say, oh my God, Isabella has two dads. It's those parents who are telling those kids, hey, that's just a different type of family. It's cool. Do you want to have them over? I mean, so that, those straight families and that environment is just as important. And I think that holds over into the professional sphere as well. It's not totally about representation. It's also about the right allies. And allies are very important. We're a big part of this country, people of color, LGBTQ, but we are still a minority, and so bringing the majority on the right side of the battle is just as important. So praise your allies when you can.
Yeah, Chris. I mean, I think that I want to stress that point where I always tell my friends, right, racism, sexism, or whatever it is you pick, right, doesn't show up like it used to. Right, it shows up in comments like just you said, where, oh, Chris, did you play a sport at Stanford? Or female friends who play golf but are never invited to the male golf outings because they can't hit the ball as far. Or even for me, personally, as an Asian American, right, the number one question I get asked in my career meetings, if I'm leading a meeting, is, oh, are you the analyst? Are you the intern? How old are you? Right, because Asians typically look younger than their age. But I find that, that kind of ism, racism, sexism, whatever, it shows up most dangerously, like in your proximal network, right? What I mean by that is I have bleeding heart liberal friends of mine here in San Francisco who work in real estate. But Chris, I'll ask them, when was the last time a Black developer pitched you on a deal, right? And it's often just met with silence. So I think that's the most scary kind of subconscious bias there is, where it actually shows up in your network of friends at algorithmic events when all the white folks are just hanging out and the minorities are kind of kept out. That's the kind of, I think racism or sexism is the most kind of dangerous. And it all just comes down to awareness and saying, oh, you know what? If I see Lindsay alone at a bar, I'm going to go talk to her. I'm going to make her feel welcome. If I know Lindsay plays golf, let's invite her to a golf outing and tell her, hey, this is just casual. You don't need to hit it as far as the boys. So anyway, I really wanted to stress that point, even within the kind of a diverse group like ours. And then, sorry, just a couple more minutes here. I know we're over on time, but I wanted to ask Brian Huang. We've chatted about this, but Brian, a couple of folks have asked kind of, hey, what's it like to be, again, a double minority? What's it like to be kind of Asian and gay, especially on the lending side for you? I always say for Asian Americans like us, right, it's actually pipeline is not the issue. Asian Americans show up a lot in analyst and associate roles. But if you start looking at the top, their promotion rates get much, much smaller. So, okay, wait, for minorities, if you fix the pipeline, how do you actually retain and promote that talent? So Brian, just wanted to kind of hear your experience working on the lending side of the business.
Yeah, it's a good question and something that, we've talked about offline. It's something that I've investigated personally, over the past year in my own personal growth and examining my relationship with white supremacy. I grew up in this country. I grew up in LA. I started my career at Lou Horn's office at CBRE, and now I work in New York and work as a bank lender. And something that makes me uncomfortable, but it's something that I think is true, right, is my comfort with being in a room full of white people and the only non-white person has helped me in my professional career. I grew up on the west side of LA in a very white dominant community. I went to school in white dominant schools, and I worked CBRE, and there aren't that many people of color, at least when I was in Lou's office downtown in LA. This is 10 years ago now. It still is a little bit of an old boys club, straight white men, older, and I didn't have Asian role models in the real estate industry in LA or even in New York, right, to look up to. And I did personally really lean into my queer identity and found those role models in the space. So in LA, if anyone knows Brian Jennings, he's an MD at CBRE. I was 22, trying to figure out if I should come out at CBRE, and just going to lunch and asking him those questions, like, how do you bring up your husband? The things that we've been talking about here, right? Like, do you come out all the time? You're client facing. How do you, deal with that? What does Luke Warren think of gay people? Like, can I be gay at this company in my career, et cetera, et cetera? But yeah, it's complex. I think it's great that we're having these conversations. I think it's great that we're all on Zoom. I think it's our responsibility as a generation to send the elevator back down and change the face of the C-suite going forward, so that the people that are coming up are going to look at a very different landscape of decision makers going forward.
Hey, last question for the panelists and kind of anyone else open to it, but a couple questions on actually salaries, right? Where oftentimes minority, whether you're a person of color, female, LGBTQ, lots of studies have shown that minorities are underpaid relative to their kind of white, male counterparts who are straight. Chris Fraley, maybe starting with you, kind of what is your best strategy for negotiating a fair compensation? Just throughout your career, what have you learned? Tough question, I know. Totally kind of out of left field, but a couple folks have asked me, as a minority, you're often underpaid, and how do you actually negotiate a fair compensation? What's your best tactic? Is it actually just doing market research? Is it asking kind of friends of that firm? And not to put you on the spot, Chris, but feel free, Lindsay and Chris and Brian to chime in if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I don't really negotiate I don't really negotiate very frequently. I haven't really done it in a while, but I think it's important to understand where the market is, and you can speak to headhunters, you can speak to friends or people at similar roles. I think, and there's a ton of data out there, but it always feels wrong. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. Sorry about that.
I would say, I think Chris and I are probably at a slight disadvantage to answer this question, because I think we're to a certain extent, we're in the invisible minority pool. Not by choice, but it's obviously more obvious that Lindsay's a woman and Chris is a Black man. That being said, I think we're in an interesting moment, at least on the coasts, and maybe in some of the other urban markets like Chicago and Atlanta, where you may be surprised that I think your minority status may actually start to become a value, especially as you get higher in your career and companies are becoming much more sensitive to trying to have that diversity at the upper levels of their company. We could be at an interesting turning point in the country. Certainly very polarized like the rest of the country, and I think it will largely depend on whether you're in a progressive area in the country. But I think companies are very sensitive right now to making sure that they have a diverse senior leadership team for new business purposes and all sorts of other reasons.
Yeah, and I think for me, to me, data is everything, right? Whether you're working on kind of diversity in the workplace, compensation. I think the tech firms are sort of 10 steps ahead of finance and real estate in this case, where all the major tech firms kind of track this data. So I always tell Polly, one of my friends here, just asked a question on how can allies help, right? It's really, I think, promoting inclusion, right, which is done in all sorts of ways. But really second, measuring that data, right? If your company doesn't measure the data on kind of everything diversity within the talent pool, as well as kind of compensation for minorities and making sure they're getting paid equal, and being kind of honest, open and honest about it, I think that goes a long way to, in a decade's time to help answer this question of actually, if you're a person of color, it shows that you're, X% underpaid relative to your counterparts. Just I think having data is everything. So, to me, every time I negotiate comp and there's so many different, partner structures, et cetera, I just reach out to kind of all my mentors like Chris Fraley, right? Say, hey, how would you negotiate this? What are you seeing in the market? How much of the promote do you think I could get? So I think, collecting data and kind of, talking to your peers and your mentors is super helpful.
Hey, Rio, can I jump in?
Please do. Hey, Carl, nice to see you.
Great to see you. I mean, I would say, so first of all, I think certainly our company at Hudson Pacific is very, very conscious of equity in a new way across, and is really trying to make sure that we're balancing across different things. I think what that looks like maybe in the first half of your career or the lower half of a hierarchy of a pyramid is very different than the upper half of a hierarchy, and there's different. I think one thing in California that's really important in recent years, and I think many states are doing this, is really lean on the fact that recruiters can no longer ask you what you're making today. So if you're a woman or a person of color or somebody else, I have certainly at times in my career been underpaid. Just do not feel the need to fill that void or answer what you're making today, and feel free to go forward with what you think the right range is, and that is the conversation you can be having, is this is what I'm looking to make. And I think that's a really important way to break this sort of compounding cycle of being underpaid, where new employers are just using what you were already making as some sort of benchmark of what you're worth. So I think that's been really valuable. And I think that, again, I think gathering that data is really important, but that only happened here in California, 2-3 years ago, I think, when that law went into effect, and recruiters are pretty careful about it. I've found.
Yeah, Carl, I'm so glad you spoke up, because that's probably the number one kind of question I dodge, right? Which is, what are you currently making? And recruiters still kind of ask it in kind of various subtle ways. But I always try to tell folks, try to negotiate in kind of ranges. Don't give a base, don't give a bonus. I always try to negotiate in the ranges, because you never know what the base bandwidth is versus what the bonus. And then, try to negotiate kind of on what the market rate for that role is, not what you were paid previously, because you could have been, severely underpaid. So anyhow, I think with that, we'll wrap it up.
Rio, how much are minorities underpaid right now? I'm going to go ask for a raise in like 20 minutes. And I just want to know what that percentage increase is I should be asking for.
Yeah, I would say 0 to 100%. So kind of negotiate within that range.
Go with 100, Chris. Go with 100.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, thank you.
Throw an anchor.
Thank you to kind of all the panelists, kind of everybody in the audience, right? I think visibility is such a key thing within a minority group. And then if you're a double minority, right, it's sort of more important to be visible to the younger folks. So really appreciate everybody's time on a busy work day, and look forward to the next event. And if you're in San Francisco, come visit us on our tour on Thursday. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Rio. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.